So, when did counseling stop being about problem solving? Well, not anymore. Introducing solution-focused counseling with the unlicensed counselor. And now, here's your host, Steve Moak.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of The Unlicensed Counselor. My name is Steve Moak. I am the Unlicensed Counselor, and as always, so grateful to be here on another beautiful, sunny Scottsdale, Arizona day. It's just a good day to be alive. Hey, so we got some fun little topics that I'm gonna talk about today, and then also throw a little test at you at the end as well too, that you can do with a friend, partner, husband, wife, all that kind of good stuff at the end. Had this thought around listening, right? Active listening. Are you a good listener? Are you a bad listener, right? You know, we all have those people in our life where it's like, I don't think that they're hearing me, or they're just not, or they're on their phone, or this is one, and I'll get into this, but it's like you can see them thinking of their thought in their head, right, as they're talking to you, and you're like, wait a second, I'm in the middle of a conversation, but you can kind of see the wheels turning over there. So I want to talk about kind of what makes someone a good listener, what makes someone a not so good listener, and then let's give you a little test to see if you're one of the good ones or the bad ones at the end as well too. But before we do that, as always, I want to say thank you to our continued sponsors of the show. As always, our friends at Shared Tech. Go to betterdrugtest.com. Pick up an at-home drug or alcohol screen. It is the industry-leading at-home drug and alcohol test available directly to you, the consumer. Again, this is the test that the leading outpatients and treatment centers tell their clients to use when they discharge and go home. It's the most accurate, the most comprehensive, and they have these built-in ways to prevent tampering of the sample as well, too. Go to betterdrugtest.com. And as always, I like to plug the nonprofit work that I do. I co-founded an organization called Hard Stop. Go to thestopstartshere.org. What this is it's youth drug prevention meets social media, right? So this is not just your 1 hour assembly. This is not just say no. This is kind of bold, edgy, raw, compelling content that we're kind of pushing out, that we are pushing out over all the social media channels. We want to get more than just an hour of your son or daughter's time focused on drug prevention. It's a different day with fentanyl. One pill can kill, that type of thing. And we want to push our messaging where the kids are the most, and that's on the social media and on their phone. So go to thestopstartshere.org. And as always, I like to just plug myself. If you want to give me a quick follow on all the typical social channels as well, too, YouTube, Instagram. You can email me, steve@theunlicensedcounselor.com. I respond to all my emails myself. If you want to disagree or maybe fill in on a topic that we didn't discuss, I'm always looking for new ideas or to even debate it with you as well, too. So, okay, back to the topic at hand. So active listening, right? Let's talk about what active listening is. Active listening is a communication technique that involves giving the full attention to the speaker, understanding their message, and responding thoughtfully, right? It's more than just hearing the words, right? It involves interpreting the speaker's intent, emotional tone, and nonverbal cues, right? So that is, just so when we're talking about active listening today, you have an idea of what that actually is. It's not just hearing those things. You've got to kind of be able to look at the entirety of the conversation, and that's when you know that you're actively listening to that individual as well, too. So let's talk about kind of some examples of how you do good listening, right? Because I have tried to be a better listener over time. I, as always, when these topics come to me, have been guilty of not being a great listener, right? I have been the one who's been trying to think of my response, whether it's witty or I can get them or something like that. That's not active listening. That's kind of defensive listening where I'm ready to kind of come back at you with something like that, right? So I, in myself, are things that I have worked on over time so that I can become a better listener as well, which hopefully makes me a better friend, better partner, better husband, better wife, better dad, all that kind of good stuff. So let's go over some of the skills or traits of what a good listener or active listener really is, right? So, let's start with, this is somebody you're going to give your full attention to, right? So you're going to avoid distractions and focus entirely on the speaker, right? This means putting away the phone, turning off the TV, and here's an amazing concept, Robin, that a lot of I think the younger people today, it's called eye contact. Just like I'm giving to you right now, and this is on a podcast, so not everybody necessarily can get it unless you're watching at home. But the idea of giving someone their full eye contact really kind of dials you in to that person, what they're saying, and lets them know that you're listening and actively listening to them as well, too. So that's a really important skill to becoming a better listener, is kind of giving them the full attention, eliminating the distractions, and also giving them that eye contact as well, too. It's kind of an old school thing, I feel like. I don't know when it became an old school trait, but it's something that I notice. I've interviewed hundreds of people for job positions. I've been interviewed. It's really something that I look for because it's just kind of a skill, a trait that lets me know that, hey, this person's connecting with me. They're here with me, right? So number 2 on my list of kind of good active listening skills, show that you're listening, right? Show that you're listening. Use body language. Use gestures, right? To show that you're engaged. Nod occasionally. Smile. How about that as a concept? Small verbal comments like, yeah, okay, I see, I understand, right? Those are little things that show me that we're actively engaged and that you're being a good listener and that we have kind of this back and forth dialogue going. That is the trait of a good listener. And now, as you hear me kind of go through some of these things, you'll probably start to notice people in your life that have these, and you're like, oh, they are a good listener. Maybe that's why you connect with them more or open up with them more, right? So number 3 is provide feedback, right? So reflect on what has been said by kind of paraphrasing and ask questions to clarify at certain points. Now, this is I'm not going to say a tricky one, but sometimes I get annoyed if somebody's just kind of chirping back to me what was just said. So kind of use it intelligently or sneakily, if you will. I really do like asking questions to clarify. A, it shows that you're a good listener as well, too. I have found that the best listeners have the best questions because they're listening, not trying to formulate the thought to then maybe impress someone or look better or something like that. So really good listeners tend to have great questions that come from this. So that's really an important skill. And side note on that, if you're ever in meetings or something like that, I've been guilty of this too, where it's like, anybody asks questions, they just covered a complex thing or maybe went through a lot of information. Ask the questions just to get clarification, because so many times it's like, yep, I got it. And I'm like, I don't got it, right? And it's like, but you're a little embarrassed to kind of say that sometimes. Be the one that kind of raises your hand and be like, I'm sorry, that was a lot of information. Can you clarify or maybe break some of these points down? I guarantee that you're not the only person in the room who's going, okay, I didn't get all that. But nobody wants to kind of raise their hand and go, I'm sorry, that was a lot of information we just digested. Can we maybe repeat it or go over it or clarify a couple points? So another little nugget that I've learned in the business world as well, too. So next up on being a good listener here is being able to defer judgment, right? So interrupting is a barrier to effective communication, right? So allow the speaker to finish each point before asking her questions and responding. So again, trying to kind of hold up on that interrupting, that jumping in, right? Let them kind of finish. Let them come or say what they have to say and try and hold that judgment back. But then at the end, after they've had their time, be like, okay, do you mind if I clarify a couple things, or if I could ask a couple questions in regard to what you said there? And it shows that you're listening, but that you're able to kind of hold that back without having to constantly pepper in, right? God knows I've listened to enough podcasts in my day where it's just like I get so sick of people interrupting or not letting someone finish the other person's thought. And it's just irritating to my ear of like, can we just let the person finish their sentence, let them finish their thought before you got to jump in? Dr. Drew, I'm referring to you. I love you, Dr. Drew, but I mean, you and Adam, I see you, just let the man finish his thought for once in his life. But you know what I mean? Like you've heard people like that, whether it's just in conversation in podcasts or interviews or things like that, where it's like, let them finish right before you just jump in. Okay, next up on the list, responding appropriately, right? Be candid, open, and honest in your response. Assert your opinions respectfully and keep the conversation constructive. That's going to show that you are a good listener and that really you're a good communicator in general, right? So not going over the top, being honest in your communication, thoughtful in your responses, right? this is going to show that you're actively heard what they said, you're engaged in this conversation, and you are just have the skill of communication. I think so many people think, and again, this is another thing you find in a lot of podcasts, that they're good speakers, talkers, presenters, and then you hear them, and it's just like, what, pause, choppy, no, Kate, it's just like, yeah, it's tough, or their responses are not in line with the question that was asked, and it's I don't know, like I said, it's kind of irritating to my ear, and if you're a good interviewer or a good communicator, these things can be very frustrating, right? And the last skill of a very good listener would be to keep an open mind as you're going through these conversations. So listening to the speaker without judging them, without mentally criticizing them, or thinking of the things that they should have said, this can lead to a better understanding of what they're trying to say as well, too. And I've run into this in family dynamics a lot, too. If because in family dynamics, you have a lot of history that's always behind a lot of these conversations and things like that, too. And, I kind of nitpick on how they say things or do things because we all have these habits and we've been conditioned within our family systems that they say it this way, I respond this way. So really, especially in a family environment, see if you can keep an open mind when that person's talking. See if you can let go of some of those past things that maybe that's why you respond that way. Keep an open mind. Try not to criticize them kind of internally as they're going on. And I think that's going to lead to an all-around better understanding, or maybe actually listening to that person as well, too. So, I've said this a lot in different podcasts because we talk about behavioral health topics and skills and things like that. These are skills. Skills take practice to develop. Practice some of these things. Don't expect the other person to always be the perfect communicator. You could be the one, right, that is the poor communicator. So putting these skills into play today, right, using eye contact, using some gestures, kind of giving those nonverbal or verbal cues that let someone know that you're actively engaged in listening in this conversation. Try these things today. Your wife may be like, holy cow, you're like a new person. This is amazing. Where did you? And be like, listen to this awesome podcast today. Kind of put some of these things into play. You never know. I could be helping some marriages out there, right? Now, those are things to show that you are a good listener, that you are active listening. But let's talk about some of the common habits of bad listeners, right? Now, I know we all think that we're probably good listeners, but we've become much worse listeners as a society in general. I can't stand having a conversation with someone who's looking at their phone. Drives me crazy, absolute pet peeve, and in fact, I will shut a conversation down. If you're doing this and we're trying to have a conversation, I'm like, not a problem. Let me know when you're ready to discuss this. Happy to chat. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm listening. I just had a work email come in. I had a text. I got a mom come in. There's a million reasons why they do or what it is, but that's not a good listener right there. And for me, that's kind of a boundary that I set with other folks. I'm like, not a problem. I understand that you're busy right now. Let's circle back to this when you have a couple free minutes so that we can actually discuss this. Because you're actually going to get to the point of the conversation, and I have to maybe drag it out 3 or 4 times, do a couple laps on it. So, common habits of bad listeners, I should say. So, number 1, interrupting frequently, right? They often cut the speaker off before they can finish their thought. And what that does is make the speaker feel undervalued or frustrated. That is so frustrating when someone's just cutting in. I'm like, whoa, wait, hold on. Let me finish. I was getting to that. You didn't let me get to that, right? And that can also create kind of some agitation as well, too, in that conversation. And all of a sudden, what was just supposed to be a simple, hey, I just need to get clear with you on the plans. We got to pick the kids up here. We got to get over there. We got dinner over here. We got this over there. And it's like, you're jumping in and peppering me and let me finish. And all of a sudden, conversation escalates. And now we're kind of chippy, right? All because we have poor communication skills, poor listening skills. And maybe this is one of those habits, that interrupting frequently, that is causing some of that. So next time you're doing this, let's see if we can just let them finish. Hey, okay, good. Are you done? Did we cover that? Is there anything else that you need to say? And try not to sound like a condescending jerk when you're asking those kind of questions as well, too, right? So I don't want to escalate it in another way. So number 2 on the list, not making eye contact. I can't stress that enough, right? if they're looking around, they're checking their phone, appear distracted, while someone else is talking, where they're just basically not here present in the conversation. I mean, it is so common today and so frustrating to try and have a conversation with someone when the phone's ringing, they're texting, checking email, things like that, right? This lack of engagement, again, can make the speaker feel unimportant, right? Or ignored. I know it does to me. And again, I've set the boundary where it's like, looks like you're busy right now. Not a problem. Completely understand. Let's just find 5 minutes where we can just chat about this when you have a few. All right. And again, tone when you're talking this. Don't use the tone that, because I've become better at that, but then I get accused of my tone not being great when it's like, okay, I'm not perfect, but you understand. Yes, I am frustrated. I'm not mad at you, but let's circle back. You obviously got a lot going on. I do need to get with you on this topic so that we can get X, Y, and Z covered, but let's circle back when you have a few, right? So just watch the tone while you're doing this as well, too. So next common thing of a bad listener. So planning responses instead of listening. Another one of my major pet peeves, right? They spend more time thinking about how they will respond than actually listening to what is being said. So what does this do? This leads to misunderstanding because they miss the key details, right? Because they're formulating the thought maybe to the first part of the thing that you were talking about. Now, I say this with a little bit of hesitation. My dad listens to the podcast, very intelligent man, successful guy. But we'll get into these conversations, and it's like we're talking, and I can see the wheels churning, right? Again, smart guy. Sorry, Dad. No offense or anything like that. But it's like we're missing, the real depth of the conversation because you're kind of formulating your response there. So you're missing maybe some of the other stuff that's happening in part of this too. So, and I'm just picking on him because he's a close family member, and we've done business together, and we've been family and friends for a long time as well, too. And there's many other people, and you see this in the business world all the time, especially when people want to have like that really good response or answer, kind of if you're in a work environment or something like that, you want to show off, be like, oh, I got this great question, or I got a great response, and you don't want to lose it or something like that. Write it down, right? Try not to let that thought kind of consume you, and make sure that you're not just planning your responses and better listening. And to what I said earlier, the best listeners tend to have the best questions because they'll let you speak, they're really engaged in what they're hearing, and now they're able to formulate a more in-depth question based on listening to everything that you've said, right? So really an important skill, and one that is hard to do, right? And we all do this where it's like, oh, I got something good I want to retort back with. Let it finish, listen. Okay, next up on the list, showing impatience or boredom, right? So expressions of impatience, like sighing loudly, right? How annoying is that when someone's out there doing, here, for all those, this is great pod, I'm checking my watch, so I'm checking the time. I'm fidgeting right now. I got the pen thing going, right? Any of those things like that, it's annoying, first off. Second off, it just shines that you're not a good listener. You're not tuned in. You're kind of doing whatever it is. You're checking the phone. You're doing all these anything but being present and showing me that you're engaged in this conversation, right? Now, look, there is maybe a time and the place for some of this when you need to break off a conversation, right? Like, I understand that. Like, hey, there's like two people in the gym, one guy in particular. He is the mayor of the gym. Super nice guy, but he will talk, and he will talk. And he will talk. And I listen, but I can't stop my workout. I've got my daughter in daycare. I got to get going. I got a time schedule. I got to get over here. I'm like, hey, and I've started using some of these techniques, not meanly, but like, hey, and I even say to him, like, look, I'm on schedule. Like, I'm happy to talk, but if you want to walk and talk, but I can't stay stuck in this conversation right now, without doing this. So have I used maybe a little bit of these from time to time, be like, hey, look, checking the watch, like, hey, I gotta get to class, I gotta get to whatever I gotta get to. But in general, if you're one of these people who are doing that, that's not a good listening skill, right? It's just that fidgeting, that sighing loudly, that impatience that you're kind of showing through your verbal and nonverbal cues, right? So something to keep in mind. And I think the quiz at the end will help you identify if you're one of those persons as well, too. And then last up on the common habits of bad listeners, misinterpreting what is said, right? Due to the lack of focus, they might misunderstand the speaker, which could lead to incorrect responses, or maybe they only listened to part of it, and then that thought kind of jumped into their head, and now they weren't able to hear the entirety of your thoughts or remarks. This can escalate conflicts and create conflicts and reduce the effectiveness of communication all around, right? So if you're not really clearly engaged in listening, and maybe I'm hearing what I want to hear because I have some thoughts or think that you're coming at me with something like that, I'm not actually listening to the words that are being said. I'm sure this happens. It's happened in my marriage. I'm sure it's probably happened in some other marriages that are out there as well too, right? You're not hearing what I'm saying. You're hearing what you want to hear. And now we're sideways, right? Now we got crisscross applesauce. Nobody's on the same page. Now tensions are rising, and we're walking away frustrated from this conversation when really neither one of us, or maybe I wasn't communicating what I needed well, but then you weren't being a great listener, and now we're just totally at odds with what was supposed to be a simple conversation, right? So something to keep in mind. So, okay, we got some common things with bad listeners. So how do we deal with some bad listeners that are out there? Because I think there's more bad listeners than good listeners, ? How about this? How about address the issue directly? If you're with someone who's got poor listening habits, they're doing this often, it might be helpful to bring them up directly, right? Like just and I'm a big fan of this approach in general. It's like, let's hit the nail on the head. Let's just get right to this. And you can do it gently. You can do it privately. It's like, hey, I've noticed some of these habits in our communication. Can we maybe talk about this? I've noticed sometimes when we're talking, it seems like we're not completely connecting. Here's an example, right? Maybe we could really work on listening to each other, right? And so you're just kind of putting it out there, right? Instead of kind of tiptoeing around it and hoping one of us changes or maybe the other one gets the hint or something like that, let's address this thing head on and see if we can, do it, and do it appropriately, gently, possibly privately as well too, so we're not embarrassing anyone, right? Another way to deal with a bad listener is let's set a positive example, right? So demonstrate good listening skills yourself. You don't want to just get out here and be critical of everybody, and meanwhile you're over here on your phone, fidgeting, hitting the pen, sighing loudly, doing all those kinds of bad things that people do, right? This can encourage that person to potentially mirror your behavior when you're actively engaged in asking questions, seeking clarification, nodding, making eye contact, doing all these things that show that you are a good listener. So kind of leading by example, right? Number 3, what about minimizing distractions, right? Let's choose a quiet place, maybe a conference room that's not getting used for an important conversation, right? Maybe we set the phones aside, we close the laptop down. So if we need to have this, let's pop over to the kitchen where it's a little quieter, that conference room, and we can sit down and do this. So just a way to at least eliminate some of the noise, the distractions that are around us constantly. When you really want to make sure that maybe that person who's not a great listener, you have a better chance at maybe connecting and hoping that they're a better listener, right? So number 4 is using engaging conversation techniques, right? Ooh, a little skill, a little trick of the trade, if you will. So ask some open-ended questions that will require more than just yes or no answers. So this will encourage deeper engagement from the listener, right? So if you just asking open and closed questions, you're going to get yes and no, and you're going to get short responses, and they can kind of tune in and out of that conversation a little bit easier. If you're asking a little more deeper questions around this, I think you're going to encourage some better responses, or you're going to be able to help them kind of dig into this and hopefully stay engaged in that conversation a little bit more effectively, right? And the last thing on how to deal with a bad listener, provide feedback and ask for clarification. So sometimes bad listeners aren't aware of the gap in communication, right? Shocking. By asking them to paraphrase or repeat what you've said, you can highlight issues and misunderstandings. So again, kind of heading things off at the pass, addressing it head on. So here's an example of like, hey, would you mind summarizing what I just mentioned to you to ensure that we're on the same page? I would maybe use a little different language that would be good for a work environment, maybe in a boss-employee type of situation. I don't know if I'd use that approach necessarily with the wife on the home front. Hey, would you mind summarizing what I just said? slap across the head. But there could be an effective way to actually do that. Be like, hey, so are we on the same page here? I'm going to be there at 5. You're picking up the kids at 5:30. Is that what you said too? Are we on the same page here? Kind of play with that again, practice, develop these skills so that, hopefully you can improve your communication and listening both ways. Don't always just think it's the other person that's the bad listener. Oftentimes it takes 2 to tango, right? So, let's be real about this. And like I said, the majority of people in society are not great listeners. The majority of people in society think they are great listeners. So let's kind of dispel that and let's call things what they are, that your listening probably needs to be improved as well too. Which brings me to the final little nugget of this episode. So what if you and a partner, what if you did a listening skills test, right? Ooh, test, scary. No, not one of those little fill in the bubble things like we had to do back in middle school and high school. I don't know if kids still even have to do that anymore, right? But this is a little test. It's a little fun to kind of see if potentially you or your partner is a good listener or not. And it's not to be like, I'm a better listener than you. Not that kind of thing at all, right? But just like, oh, maybe you have a blind spot that you didn't really realize that you weren't a great listener. And now, okay, I didn't know that about me. And now we've kind of gone through this little exercise that I'm going to share with you. And now hopefully you can make some strides to improve that as well too. So first things first, find a partner, family, friend, husband, wife. They should be willing to engage in kind of a detailed conversation for a few minutes, right? So that's just kind of the parameters. Let's set the scene. So ensure that the environment is kind of free from distractions like background noise, television, phones, laptops, kids, all that kind of good stuff, right? So you're kind of setting aside a little quiet time here, right? Now, ask your partner to kind of speak about a specific topic, something that they're interested in, could be current events, could be whatever is kind of interesting for 3 to 5 minutes, right? Maybe it's current events, a recent event, or something that they experience, whatever, dealer's choice. Find something that you can just talk about for 3 to 5 minutes, right? Now, while they speak, right? So this is the other person. So one person's talking, I'm on the other side, listening to this. While they speak, focus on using active listening techniques such as we've discussed, right? So maintain eye contact. And I mean really maintain eye contact, right? Nod or make appropriate facial expressions and sounds to show engagement. So I'm looking, interesting. I didn't know that. Wow, okay. All right, so just whatever that is for you, let's get that going. This is a practice. This is a little test, right? Do not interrupt while they are speaking. They have to speak that entire 3 to 5 minutes. You are just listening, okay? Now, once they've finished, let's do the following. Let's go ahead and summarize. So let's go ahead now. You, the one who just listened, recap what you heard. Recap what you heard them say to show that you were listening and understand the main points, right? So, okay, thank you for that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and recap and kind of summarize exactly what I just heard you saying, right? And go through it. Do a good recap, right? And then I want you to ask some questions. So pose thoughtful questions that relate to their topic. Don't be sarcastic. This isn't a time for your bad humor or whatever like that, right? Pose some thoughtful questions. I wanted to show that you not only listened, but you were interested, and you would actually like to discuss it further, right? So this is a test that I want us to kind of participate in, right? Okay, now, you've had the conversation. I want you to ask your partner to rate your listening skills after you've each done your side of this experiment, right? How well did you understand the topic? Did you feel heard? Did you feel understood? Then assess yourself on the same criteria, right? This is a fun little simple way. This is going to take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that you can kind of do, and then assess yourself. And then the last step is to kind of reflect on the experience. Were there moments that you felt distracted while you were doing this? How well were you able to summarize their points? Now, this test kind of gives you a practical way to assess your ability to actively listen and engage in a conversation meaningfully. And I think ideally you should then switch roles, right? Whether you do it back to back or do it the next day or something like that. But I want you to listen to that feedback from your partner because it's crucial to understand that external perspective on how well you were perceived as a listener, right? So, listening is a skill. It takes practice. You have to put these things into play to get better at it, right? Using this little test is just a little way that maybe you can enlighten yourself a little bit or identify some possible areas of improvement for your own personal listening skills. Again, this could be just in your family. This can be in work. Ideally, it's going to be just for your entire life in general. So, tricky. Hopefully you listen to this entire podcast. But this would be a great episode to go ahead and share with a friend, family member, loved one, husband, wife, whatever it is, and be like, look, listen to what he kind of talked about at the end with this listening experiment. Let's block 15, 30 minutes, and let's see if we can do it and have some fun. Maybe we'll learn something new about each other, right? So, again, my name is Steve Moak. I am the Unlicensed Counselor. Till next time, thank you very much.